So to begin with this evening, before Dr. Rath speaks, we thought it might be a good idea if I tell you a little bit about Dr. Rath and the Foundation, what we do and what we stand for. The Foundation is a non-profit organisation, and our money is used to support research work into natural therapies and educational work about the business practices of the pharmaceutical industry, what we call the business with disease. To illustrate our work, I'm going to briefly summarise a few of the campaigns that we're engaged in at the moment to give you an idea of what it is that we do. Our Stop Codex campaign will be where I'll start. Codex is the Codex Alimentarius Commission. It's a United Nations organisation. It lives and breathes the air of the UN system. It's sponsored by two United Nations organisations, the Food and Agriculture Organisation and the World Health Organisation. As you'll see, most of its money comes from the Food and Agriculture Organisation. This, as you will see in a moment, is because Codex is not really about health. What does it do? Well, it creates international standards and guidelines for all food products, which includes food supplements. This also includes many of the things that you don't want to find in your food, such as food additives, pesticide residues, food contaminants, and so on. In the case of food supplements, what Codex is doing, and perhaps the main thing that concerns us as the Foundation, is it's threatening to reduce the levels of micronutrients in these supplements to near useless levels. As regards the additives and pesticide residues and food contaminants, we believe that the levels of these substances are far too high, and that in the long term they are injurious to human health. Now, the creation of these standards and guidelines is highly influenced by industry, the food industry, but also the pharmaceutical industry. Why is this important? Why does it matter? The key reason why it matters is because the World Trade Organization, another United Nations organization, uses Codex standards and guidelines as the benchmark when it adjudicates on international trade disputes involving foods. Because of this, because of the potential threat to a country of becoming involved in and losing a trade dispute, this really acts as the stick to make the adoption of Codex guidelines and standards mandatory under international law. The reason being that if a country gets involved in a trade dispute through refusing access to food with these levels of pesticides and contaminants, it risks becoming involved in a trade dispute, becoming on the receiving end and receiving strict, harsh financial penalties as a result of losing such a dispute. Clearly, from what I've just said, you can see that Codex is not the most environmentally friendly of organisations. By mandating the global use of GM ingredients, artificial additives and pesticides, it's damaging not just ourselves, but damaging the planet as well. In addition, of course, by encouraging free global trade, Codex is also increasing the number of food miles on your dinner plate. Now, there's nothing wrong, of course, with the international trade in food in the sense that free trade is a good thing. But if the food on your dinner plate has been flown halfway around the world to get there, then perhaps we need a rethink of some of these issues. So what is Codex really about? Well, it's a complicated subject, but in essence, it's the primary battlefield. It's a political battlefield where a war, a real war, is being waged about who will regulate and control the global food supply from the farm to your fork. It's about trade, it's about profits, and it's about protecting the pharma industry's control of our healthcare systems. That's where the food supplement part of the issue comes in. And it's not about health. This is why the WHO, the World Health Organization, puts so little money into it. Moving on, the EU referendum campaign. The EU, the European Union, is one of the key players at Codex. It uses its might of 27 countries to try to force Codex guidelines and standards that closely resemble European Union legislation. So in the case of vitamin and mineral legislation, the Codex guidelines on food supplements very closely resemble passages of an equally strict regulatory piece of legislation, the European Union Food Supplements Directive. Now, we think that people deserve a choice in this matter. We think that the European Union should give people the chance, via a referendum, to state their wish to see free access to natural health remedies. So we're calling upon the European Union to protect the fundamental right of all citizens to good health. And we're aiming to collect no less than 1 million signatures Europe-wide in support of this campaign. Now, as many of you will know, it's not easy to access good, reliable information about natural health issues. We recognise this as well, and so for some years now, Dr. Rath has been publishing open letters in prominent international newspapers. This one is the first one that was published in the New York Times, and it urged President George Bush to make health, not war. We cover a variety of themes in these open letters: natural medicine issues, the illegality of the war in Iraq, the threat that nuclear weapons and wars of aggression pose to the survival of mankind, and of course, the pharma industry's business with disease. We publish these open letters in newspapers all around the world. Here's an example of one that was published a few years ago in the South China Morning Post. It describes how vitamin C is a useful agent against all infections, and it was published, of course, at the time of the SARS scare. SARS, as some of you may remember, was the infection that was supposedly going to kill thousands, perhaps even millions of us. It was a serious threat to our lives. But of course, as quickly as it arrived on our front pages, it disappeared again, to be replaced with the bird flu threat, which is the latest scare thrown at us. We also engage in publicising issues to do with the war on terror. And of course, the war that all of us fear, that none of us want the war on terror to escalate into, of course, is nuclear war, which is a good way to link to our Stop Nuclear War campaign. A campaign that really needs no explanation. The title of the campaign says it all. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I can't imagine that anyone would disagree with the idea that the war on terror has been an unmitigated disaster. A disaster for the 600,000 people, innocent men, women and children, who've lost their lives in Iraq thus far, and a disaster for international relations, a disaster for the way in which our so-called political leaders are now viewed around the world. The hypocrisy of forcing other countries at the point of a gun to relinquish their nuclear weapons or their development of nuclear weapons, whilst at the same time our countries are armed to the teeth. And at the same time, of course, considering upgrading and updating our own Trident nuclear missiles. So when you leave this building later this evening, ladies and gentlemen, if you were to support nothing else that we do, we would urge you to support this campaign. Which brings me on to the campaign for equality for natural therapies, which is the latest campaign, of course, brought to a head by the issue of the British Medical Journal and its accusations that it threw at Dr. Rath in such a spectacular fashion. Natural health, of course, is largely ignored in our medical journals, and there's perhaps no better example of this than the British Medical Journal itself, which, as the Financial Times announced only a few days ago, makes its money largely from pharma industry advertising. In other words, this is an issue that the pharmaceutical industry cannot escape from, the British Medical Journal cannot escape from. In any other language, is called the conflict of interest. As you see there, the other quote on this screen is from Richard Smith, a man who edited the British Medical Journal for 25 years, a quarter of a century. And he said, as you can see, medical journals are an extension of the marketing arm of pharmaceutical companies. Well, he should know. And just to clarify this statement, this is not a statement that I extracted and quoted out of context from an article. This was actually the title of an article that Richard Smith wrote to illustrate his concern regarding this issue. The issue is, ladies and gentlemen, that natural therapies do not have equal status in our medical journals, especially including the British Medical Journal. The issue relates to a conflict of interest, and we believe it's time that these interests were exposed. From time to time, we get GPs coming to us and saying, surely, if these natural therapies were as effective as you say they are, wouldn't I be reading about them in the British Medical Journal? Well, now perhaps you understand why. Or why not, more to the point. So we're launching this campaign this evening, ladies and gentlemen, to try to make the British Medical Journal see sense. And so, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, the man you've come to hear this evening is possessed of a quality that's increasingly rare in this world of ours. He's possessed of the ability to step outside of conventional wisdom and to think for himself. This naturally brings him into conflict with those of a different persuasion who may feel that the status quo that they're protecting is at threat. In his case, however, there are no vested interests, simply a strong desire for fairness, for truth, and a better world where good health, peace, and social justice are available to all. Please give him a warm welcome, Dr. Matthias Rath.
Good evening. Thanks, Paul, for these nice words of introduction. Thank you all for coming. I think we are competing with a soccer match, I heard. An interesting one at that. But we could not wait. We had to do this event. So the urgency of certain issues is greater than all considerations for timing, and therefore I appreciate that you came, and you will hear the entire lecture as I would have given it to 500 people or 800 people or more. The interest for this evening was specifically high in some media who thought they ought to check in who this guy is and what he has to say. We told them that they can have copies of the recordings that we're doing, and but we did not want any disturbances here in terms of too many people recording and filming and kind of interrupting the flow of this evening. The reason why you came is probably curiosity. Maybe you are also here because you yourself or someone you love is concerned with certain health problems, including cancer. What you will hear tonight is a run-through the last 18 years of my life, of the battle we have been fighting. Obviously, many of the things that I wanted to tell you, or I should tell you, I can't because it has to be inevitably condensed. But luckily, there is the internet and there is information that you can obtain online. And this is why I believe the right thing to do is to take you with me on this journey. There were times on our planet when the people looked at the sky and they knew exactly how the universe operates. They knew that the sun is rising in the east and setting in the west, and there was no question that the sun was circulating our planet. How could it be different? The stars, they were told, are fixed to crystal spheres high above the plate that was called Earth. This was the view how we looked at our universe for millennia. And suddenly, the course of this planet changed within a few years, actually. Of course, it didn't really change. What changed was the way we looked at it. Mankind looked at it. There were several scientists who were responsible for that. This was one of them, Galileo Galilei. They said something unheard of. They said, wait a minute, the earth is circling the sun, not vice versa. Everyone at that time said, great. Finally, we know it. Let's have a rally in Rome or Paris or wherever in London and celebrate. That was not the case. Too many interests were dependent. That the earth is a plate. That the center of this plate is Rome. Because if you are in the center, you are the chosen one. And worst of all, if the earth is not the center of the universe, where did these guys get their power from? How could they sell their power to the people? If suddenly the sun was in the center. So this was not an academic question. This was a question with a lot of power attached to it. Accordingly, Galileo was called in. They showed him the torture instrument. They said, you got to revoke this. You got to recant. Because we don't want this to be true. It took 400 years to confirm everything that Galileo had said. But eventually, the truth prevailed. Even more dramatic are changes in the universe of medicine. Again, for millennia, epidemics were the greatest threat to the health of our ancestors. It was very clear what the reason for that was. They knew the cause. Epidemics were the curse of heaven for the sins of the people. No one questioned that for century after century. Until someone came along and said, well, let's look under the microscope, what we can see, what we can find. And suddenly, microorganisms were identified as the cause of epidemics that were taking the lives of tens of hundreds of millions of people. Everyone in Paris at that time was celebrating in the streets. Great man, Pasteur. Not so. For 25 years, the own Academy of France was fighting this man with the argument, you You are just a chemist. You're not even a doctor. It was only on July 6, 1885, when a young boy was vaccinated against rabies and survived this deadly disease, that everything turned. James Lind, one of your countrymen, he found out that one of the most deadliest diseases for sailors, taking the lives of hundreds of thousands of your countrymen in the past, that disease was not really a disease. It was a nutritional deficiency. They did not know at that time that it was caused by the inability of the human body to produce vitamin C in combination with the low vitamin nutrients on board of the ships. So he did the experiments. He gave some sailors vinegar, he gave some sailors limes, and those who got limes survived, did not develop scurvy. The British Admiralty was happy. They said, this man is going to be our new advisor to the king. No. It took 40 years until the Admiralty was able to throw away the dogmas of old thinking and provided limes, lemons to the sailors. 40 years. During which time tens of thousands of sailors died. Not because it was not known, but because it was not implemented, this knowledge. Today, cancer is one of the greatest health challenges. And we are being told, sorry, cancer is a death verdict. You go to the doctor, he diagnoses or she diagnoses cancer on you. Your first question is not, doctor, what can I do? Your first question is what? How long do I have to live? So you've accepted this. You've accepted the dogma that this is a death verdict. But as you will see tonight, there's a huge industry building on this dogma. And this industry makes so much money that they have no interest to change this dogma. Worse, if this dogma changes, billions and billions of pounds are being lost for this investment business. This was a short introduction. What I wanted to accomplish with this is that we are not talking about the BMJ only, about Fiona Godley or whoever it is. It's not about persons. It's not about me. It's about moments in history where we need to elevate ourselves to live up to what this means. So when in the next section of my talk, I'll be talking about the British Medical Journal, and I guess we'll have some fun with it. It's not about belittling these people. It is about taking this as an example for understanding the way we need to take. Not only us as scientists, but you as the people. Paul already mentioned this When we talk about the British Medical Journal, we need to first define who it is. And the best way to define an organization, or in this case a journal, is to see who's paying for it. Who is the financier? That's how you characterize, you define an institution, an organization, and a medical journal. The Financial Times of March 16, 2007 wrote, I quote, "The BMJ, with a print circulation of 120,000 and 1.2 million online users, makes its money largely from pharmaceutical industry advertising and is targeted at general practitioners and hospital generalists. The bread I eat, the song I sing, as the saying goes." This is Dr. Fiona Godley, the editor-in-chief of this arguably most important medical journal. Fiona, we looked her up, has no track record as a scientist. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you stick with what you know. We specifically looked whether she had done any research herself on vitamins or micronutrients or any other science-based natural health research. Nothing. So everything she says, everything she talks about, she publishes, she writes about Dr. Rath, is hearsay. Someone else has told her that. What to think, what to write, what to say, whom to attack. And then there are other people, colleagues of Dr. Godley. Here's one of them, Dr. Marcia Angel, the former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, in a way her counterpart across the Atlantic. She was the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine for more than 20 years. And summarizing that time, she wrote a book, The Truth About the Drug Companies, how they deceive us and what we should do about it. I recommend that you at one point get this book, either from a library or from a bookstore. It will open your eyes. It will tell you that the criticism you read by me in this flyer that you may have found in your mailbox at home, or the things you will hear tonight, is rather diplomatic compared to what Dr. Angel says. The pharmaceutical industry, she writes, uses its wealth and power to co-opt every institution that might stand in its way, including US Congress, the FDA, the medical centers, and the health profession itself. And she calls the pharmaceutical industry a 200-pound colossus. Now, when I came here, I thought for myself, what is a 200-pound colossus? How can I illustrate that? And I found this picture. For me, this is a 200-pound colossus, a gorilla. Maybe she was afraid to use the word gorilla, so she used the word colossus. And this is the 200-pound pharma gorilla facing the editor of a medical journal. I owe you a short rundown on the events that led up to this scandal. Some of these figures we will visit in the next hour and a half. The discovery how vitamins can block the spread of cancer cell. Way back, 15 years, 16 years now. the foundation of an institute to prove this concept. The first publication of the results of this research. It's true, cancer is no longer a death verdict in USA Today, which is the highest circulating newspaper on this planet, in 2002. And when you attack a dogma that is the basis of a multi-billion-dollar investment business with chemotherapy drugs, you pay the price. In 2003, we had so much research data together that we did a speaker tour, like I'm doing here, through the medical university cities in Germany. Not everyone, only those where there were research centers on oncology, which is a discipline researching cancer. Tübingen, Heidelberg, Münster, Hamburg, Leipzig. We invited the professors. We had the first rows free for them. None of them showed up. The people came. The rooms were packed. But those most concerned with it did not come. Later we learned that some of them had sent their wives to check us out and see what's going on. But they themselves did not come. But the people came. They used this knowledge. And month after month after month after these lectures, people came back to these university doctors and said, you know, my cancer had shrunk, had decreased, had disappeared. So they had to act. And here's what they did. They said, we cannot prohibit an adult person for taking vitamins in addition to chemotherapy or instead of chemotherapy. People choose what they do. But we can make a case out of a child that is escaping our grip of chemotherapy. So here was 9-year-old Dominik Feld suffering from bone cancer. He was under the grip of chemotherapy for 5 months, 15 cycles of chemotherapy. At the end of the 15th cycle, this 9-year-old boy weighed 16 kilograms, which is about 30 pounds. 9-year-old. He was about to die. His parents finished the suffering, took him home against the will of the professors at the University of Münster, who, by the way, were the presidents of the Chemotherapy Society for Children. That was in May 2003. The parents decided to look around. What are the alternatives? Without us knowing, they found micronutrients that we had researched, and they gave them to the child. On September 1, 2003, Dominik was back in school after 1.5 years. Was catching up quickly. 3 weeks later, he had a control CT of his lungs where metastasis of his bone cancer had been diagnosed under chemotherapy. The metastases were gone. The pictures were sent to the chemotherapy professors in Münster. And instead of congratulating the parents and saying, "Great, a life saved." They went to court and filed a lawsuit against the parents to have the medical custody of their child being taken away from them. With collateral demagoguery against me, against vitamin research, these university professors were able to convince this court in November 2003, the parents of Dominic were no longer the medical authorities of their own child. That's when they contacted me. They said, "We are afraid that the police is coming and taking our child and bringing it back to the hospital and forcibly getting the infusions of chemotherapy." I said to them, "I can't help you unless you are willing to change everything you have done thus far. You have to give up your family life. You have to become outspoken. You have to talk about what's happening." And they agreed. We made Dominic a household name in Germany. Not because we wanted to market this child, because no one is profiting from this work. But this was the only way how to save his life. The appellate court decision in April 2004 gave the right medical custody back to the parents. He was so healthy that he had his communion, that he started to play soccer again, and as fate wants it, he had a soccer ball hitting his head. He was a goalie. So he had to be hospitalized for a hematoma. And that's when the other side struck back. That was the beginning of an odyssey through medical clinics in Germany. They punctured his lung without any control X-rays being done. Medical malpractice at its best. They had him live on the ward with breathing with water. And if the boy has pain, he will inject morphine. Morphine, as you may know, is a depressant of respiration, so that was a sure way to say goodbye. I will shorten this. The parents had to flee with their child to Mexico, fleeing not from the law because they were given the right, but no one, no doctor, no hospital in Germany would treat this child because they all said he's dying. So they went to a clinic in Mexico, and the doctors there too, after reading all those reports, they said, well, he has a big tumor. And no one was listening to the fact that there was no big tumor. They had destroyed his lung. It was deflated. And his thorax had been filled up with a huge hematoma, which was compressing the heart. 10 weeks after they had punctured his lung, subsequently filled up his thorax with a huge hematoma, he died for cardiovascular failure. That was the beginning of one of the most amazing and disreputable witch hunts in the history of German medical discipline. I was on the front page of the Bild-Zeitung, comparable to the Sun, for 3 days in a row. When is he going to jail? He killed this child. It took a year until the pathology report was released, and everything we had said was right. The left lung had been collapsed. There was no evidence for tumors, nothing. He did have cancer cells in his body, obviously, but this big tumor that they were telling 80 million people in Germany that came from taking vitamins and for which Dr. Rath is personally responsible was a fata morgana. Accordingly, nothing was undertaken. No procedures were being opened against the parents or me, because we were right. Because of that failure to bring me to prison on the case of Dominic, the pharmaceutical industry was looking for another possibility to eliminate Dr. Rath from this field of medicine. They started an investigation that our vitamins, the vitamin progress we researched, documented, we're recommending to patients are drugs, prescription drugs that are being sold without a license. 12 pounds of so-called evidence was collected by the state prosecutor of Hamburg. In parallel, the media set in, including the British Medical Journal. When is he finally burning at the stake? That was the background of this article in the BMJ. If you want to know more about this case of Dominic, we have documented everything I said, including the pictures, medical reports, etc., on our website with the help of the parents of Dominic. So on July 22, 2006, the BMJ published an article alleging what I just said, that I'm standing trial for fraud in connection with the death of Dominic. It was an absurd, open lie. Accordingly, we filed a lawsuit in Great Britain, Germany too. Finally, on September 23, 2006, after a British judge described the BMJ's accusation as among the most severe ever, the BMJ finally agreed to publish a retraction and apology. We now accept, they wrote, that the allegations we published were without foundation. And in the circumstances, the BMJ wishes to set the record straight and to apologize to Dr. Rath for publishing these allegations. They specifically referred to this case of Dominic. They wrote, we had published in the BMJ and on the website an article and reported that Dr. Rath had gone on trial in Hamburg for fraud. In this context, we suggested that Dr. Rath stood accused of the serious crime of fraud in relation to the death in 2004 of Dominic Feld. that he was culpably responsible for Dominic Feld's death, and in particular that he had improperly pressured Dominic Feld's parents into refusing to allow hospital doctors to amputate the boy's infected leg. Every sentence was a lie. Nothing was true. Worse, by going to the prosecutor's website, the BMJ could have verified that this is a lie. They didn't. They were so eager to see Dr. Rath burn at the stake. The trial in Hamburg ended with the judge saying, Dr. Rath is not a charlatan. He is likely a pioneer for new ways in controlling cancer. He called me an honorable man in front of the entire press of Germany. I went up to him later and I said, thanks for the fairness. But it was not my face or the speeches given. It was the science that was presented during these 2 days of hearing that he could not ignore. That was the weapon. And precisely that is the weapon that we were showing the BMJ. We said, we are not interested in a settlement with you guys. We want to see you in court, proving what you are saying and proving our point. And that is also the answer to this question, why did the British Medical Journal pay the record amount of £100,000? We've tried, our attorneys who are here tonight, they tried to find an incident where the BMJ had paid a higher amount than this one. We haven't been able so far to do this. So the analysis is very simple. The BMJ paid a record amount of money to avoid a public exchange of scientific arguments in a British court, comparing chemotherapy with the science-based natural approaches to cancer. Do you understand what that means? When I saw that this room tonight is not packed, I said to myself, we've had similar situations in Germany and other countries where the message that we deliver is so shocking that it takes people some time to believe it. They think this is a marketing gimmick. It's not. Well, let me just emphasize this last paragraph. Then when the BMJ was dragging its feet, we said, we're going to publish this open letter to Fiona Godley online, stating that we do not wish to settle this case, we want to see them in court. So we went into the offensive. So they went to court, the BMJ, and said, we are willing to pay £100,000 in order not to have the full case being heard. And the judge agreed to that because he probably felt that this is a huge amount, and maybe there was a BMJ factor involved here too. So we were in the situation of appealing this decision. But what would it have? What would that mean or have meant? Another 6 months, 9 months of legal disputes, unclear outcome at the end, people dying during that time. So we said, no, we're going to take this money, we're going to finance the information that we have been distributing through London, we're going to rent this place, and what's left over we're going to put into research. That's why we did it. It was not because we caved in or gave in to the BMJ at any point in time. There's no reason that we do this. But sometimes you have to be a fox and not a lion in order to move forward. And sometimes, and that's even more important, the responsibility to human life is what dictates the decision. Paul already introduced these elements that were in my open letter. I said, I demand that the BMJ puts an equal amount of natural health information than information of pharmaceutical products in the future editions of that journal. The editorial board of the BMJ has to be restructured, so it's not just composed of marketing experts of pharmaceutical products. And there have to be an equal amount of scientists and medical researchers representing natural health research. I also said the BMJ should launch a Young Researcher Award in science-based natural health so that young people are attracted to this field and are not just trained as salespeople for the drug industry. So the question that really comes down to, what are these interest groups afraid of? We've covered one aspect, and that is the science. But the other aspect is even more important, and that is you. So I put this us on there, because me giving you the arguments that I will give you in a few minutes, the knowledge, the understanding, you will take the lead. You will take an understanding home tonight that you won't get at a medical school. You don't need to believe me. You just believe your own thinking. I'm sure you will go home and you will search to disprove what you're going to be hearing tonight. If you are able, welcome back. Call me, write to us. But if you see that what I said tonight is right, then another decision will come up on you, and that is, what are you going to do about it? We'll come to that. So the us means, I'm giving you something, I'm giving you information. You are taking that as lay people, and you are carrying this information, irrespective of what Fiona or anyone else says. That's what they are afraid of. The democratization of medicine, the breaking of the ban of illiteracy on health. And here is the basis of that. When you hear about cellular medicine, it is nothing fancy, nothing esoteric. It just means that health and disease originate and are decided at the level not of organs, but of cells. When you open the yellow pages in London and look for doctors, you'll find the cardiologist, the nephrologist for the kidneys, the orthopedic doctor. So it's structured into organs. But what is ignored is the fact that health and disease is decided at the much smaller level, which is the cells that make up these organs. And irrespective whether this is a liver cell, whether this is a blood vessel cell, whether this are white blood cells or any other type of cell, they are built remarkably similar. Each cell essentially works like a small city or a small town, like a village. There is the center where the information is stored, what is happening in my little town. And that's the core here, the nucleus of this cell. And then there's a factory where the things that this cell wants to produce or has to produce is being manufactured. That is happening in this complex here, which is called Golgi complex. Now, for example, if this is a pancreas cell, this factory would produce insulin. If this is a white blood cell, this factory would produce antibodies to fight invading microorganisms, and so on. But irrespective of what this cell is doing, it needs energy, bioenergy. Without that energy, this work cannot be done, and the cell will not be able to function properly. In the long run, this means that not only the cells malfunction, but also the organ malfunctions, and then diseases develop. Now, what is this energy? Well, we are differentiating between macronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients, proteins, sugars, fat. Micronutrients, vitamins, amino acid, trace elements, certain minerals are part of that too. In a way, you could look at the macronutrients as the charcoal in the oven, and the micronutrients as the ignition, the fire. So when someone comes to you and says, you get all your energy in your body from the macronutrients, you tell them, well, it's like storing charcoal in my oven and not igniting it. There's no heat developing. Now that, of course, is a lay description, but it brings across the point. This is an important picture here. There are 4 elements that define our life: oxygen, water, food, the macronutrients, and what we call cellular nutrients or micronutrients. Interestingly, 3 of them have clear alarm signals. If you're lacking oxygen, you feel it. You're choking. If your body has too little water, you get thirsty. Hunger is the alarm sign for lack of food. But if you are lacking micronutrients, there is simply no alarm sign. The only way to do something about that is by understanding this, by education, by what we are doing tonight. Then I'm hearing there is no scientific evidence for vitamins in human health. Dr. Rath is a charlatan. This is why we need to protect the public from charlatans like him. Well, I don't have the time to dispute these kind of arguments. I just say go to the textbooks of biology, of biochemistry, go to the records of the Nobel Prize Committee, which have an online presentation, and you'll find the records. Here is the first one. Dutch scientist Christian Eijkman, he got the Nobel Prize for the role of vitamin B1 in preventing beriberi. Now, you may think beriberi, well, it sounds like a remote disease. Well, we will see later on that this disease has a lot of clear functions that remind us on major unsolved cardiological problems today, including something like heart failure. We'll come to that. German guy, Adolf Windaus, he got the Nobel Prize in 1928, I'm quoting, for the services rendered to humanity, probably, through his research into the constitution of the sterols and their connection with the vitamins. British Nobel Prize, 1937, Norman Haworth. He got it for his work on carbohydrates and vitamin C. The same year, his colleague Carrer got the prize for carotenoids, flavins, and vitamin A. The same year, the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded to an Hungarian scientist, Albert Szent-Györgyi, for his role in discovering vitamin C and the function of this vitamin in the cells of the human body. I was privileged to work with one of these scientists that dedicated major parts of their life to this research. This was Dr. Linus Pauling. After leaving the Pauling Institute, establishing our own research efforts after Dr. Pauling had died, I was faced with a problem. We did not know how to finance this independent research. I had been contacting major pharmaceutical companies, including Hoffmann La Roche, Schering, others. I had been giving talks at the headquarters of Roche in Basel, met with their lead researcher, the licensing head, major players in this global cooperation. They sent me a letter saying, "Great stuff what you've told us. We want to tell you, however, that we are not going to be cooperating with you because your research competes with our own in-house products in the field of cholesterol lowering in heart disease, chemotherapy, and cancer." I said, "This can't be. How should I get the money together to finance this research, to bring it to the understanding of the people?" But this is my, in retrospect, naivete. I really believed that the pharmaceutical industry is here on this planet to deliver health. How stupid. You know what they did? That was in 1991. They wrote this letter to me saying thanks but no thanks. And they turned around on their swivel chair, and the guy from Roche called up the BASF guy and said, "You know, Pauling and Rath are coming up with a great story on heart disease and vitamin C." Heart disease was the main field at that time. We are expecting a major increase in vitamin C consumption. So they met and they conspired for price fixing of the raw material of vitamin C, to the extent that Roche had to pay $800 million after a US investigation had revealed the entire scheme. Or I should say, well, one of the companies became a crown witness of the scandal and delivered all the other guys to the hook. Criminal price fixing. The largest fines, corporate fines, issued by the US government for the discoveries we're talking about. Not to promote them, but to take advantage of them without promoting them. You understand that? They said, we don't want to actively promote it, but we know these guys are doing it anyway, so at least we want to earn money from the raw materials. What a dirty attitude. So, why am I saying this? The only way how we could move forward, how we could finance the research, how we could build the institute that, or actually we are leasing it, but how we can do all those things is by selling our knowledge in form of the micronutrients that we developed, we test, and using the profits to do those things. Now, we have been attacked over the years, and people said, well, you can say a lot of things, we don't believe you. So in 2004, I finally decided the best way is to put all the shares of the company into a foundation. That's what we did. And use the money of this foundation for two things. First, to continue promotion of independent research and of education. Events like this in other cities, in other countries. That's who we are. So we are not only different from the pharmaceutical industry with respect to our products, that we are using natural products, we also differ from them with respect to our business ethics. We say health is not something where you should be rewarded from promoting diseases, but where you should be rewarded for eliminating them. And there needs to be no profit incentive for that. Coming to cancer. 55,000 pharmaceutical researchers, as we sit here, as we meet tonight here, are working on cancer, looking for a cure for cancer. 55,000. 32 Nobel laureates on cancer research. Millions of dollars or pounds or euros being spent. Every second week, we see it in the newspapers, there is a breakthrough in cancer. Well, it comes and goes. Fact is, the rate for cancer is still increasing in most countries of the world. Which is the best sign for what? That all these guys here are looking for something else. What do I mean with that? Chemotherapy. You are the patient who has just been diagnosed with cancer. Your doctor says, well, don't worry, we have chemotherapy. You will ask, doctor, what does chemotherapy do in my body? He will say, it kills the cancer cells. What he won't tell you is what? It kills all the cells. How in the world could it be different? If you pump a toxic chemical substances in the veins, the blood carries this toxic substance everywhere. It's an illusion to think in another way about that. I looked up the most common chemotherapeutic agents currently injected into cancer patients around the world. About half of them are registered in the US government's register for cancerogenic substances. I think I should repeat this sentence. You are coming to a doctor, he tells you, I have a therapy for you for your cancer. But in 50% of the cases, the substance he injects in your veins is a registered chemical that is known to cause cancer. And now we're beginning to understand the pharmaceutical investment business. It sees the human body as a marketplace. You're diagnosed with cancer? Great. Let's see how far we can profit from the fate. We inject chemotherapy, patented, tens of thousands of pounds per year for one patient. But that's not enough for us. Because these are toxic chemicals and they damage the human body, we are creating other markets. The toxic substances, they destroy the intestinal cell, the lining in the bowel. That's why cancer patients start to bleed. No problem. We have the possibility to sell you anything you want for bleeding. Cancer chemotherapy destroys the collagen, the connective tissue, resulting in swelling of the joints and pain. No problem. We have cortisol. Cancer chemotherapy attacks the nerve cells, creating pain, sometimes unbearable pain. No problem. We have painkillers. And if you're no longer standing it, then we have tranquilizers. I'm not making this up. The market of the follow-up drugs is bigger than the market for chemotherapy drugs itself. Do you understand the principle of the pharmaceutical business? So I'm asking you, what interest does the pharmaceutical industry have to stop cancer, those 55,000 researchers, if they have revenues of billions of pounds from keeping this disease ongoing? Well, that's the answer. Zero interest. So in other words, they're sending those 55,000 researchers into the woods and say, well, stay there, do whatever you want, but don't come back with a solution. If it were different, it would not be possible that a small research group like us could challenge the BMJ and the entire medical establishment in this field and win in the courts. It would not be possible because we are not so intelligent. Well, a little bit, but not so that we could compete with 55,000. Over 150,000 men and women die of cancer in the UK every year. This corresponds to the population of whole towns and cities such as Oxford, Dundee, Swindon, Huddersfield, Blackpool. This means that in Britain alone, more than 1.5 million people have been sacrificed to the pharmaceutical business with the cancer epidemic. Even so, cancer is no longer a death verdict. This is our first patient. Well, I should say this is the first patient who took advantage of our breakthrough back 8 years now. Mr. Pilniak, 70-year-old lung cancer patient. This is his lung. Here you see a spot that is being magnified down here. This white spot here is the cancer in his lung. 7 months later, after taking combination of vitamin C, lysine, I think at that time, two components mainly, he goes back. Control X-ray is being conducted. The doctor comes and says, Mr. Pilniak, you have to come back next Monday. Our X-ray machine is kaput. Because that was the picture. So he came back next Monday, and it was still kaput. So he should have come back 1 week later, but he refused. He said, just believe it. It's gone. He's still alive and he works with us and gives speeches himself. Another patient here from Berlin, brain cancer. This is a CT of the brain, which means you have this kind of horizontal picture tape. The white butterfly in the middle, that's the ventricle filled with contrast medium. That is okay, that belongs there. What is not okay is this white spot here, which is a glioblastoma. This was a 50-year-old woman, and 5 months after starting the micronutrients, the control exam revealed that the tumor had disappeared. Below, that's a woman from Graz, Mrs. Moschik, that's in Austria. This was a metastasis of a lymphoma, a blood cancer, in the area of the knee. This is the bone of the upper leg, humerus. And this is the knee region here. This spot here is the cancer, and it has disappeared after 5 months. We have many more documentations of that on our website. What is important to understand is that these are not individual cases. We have been testing the micronutrients in our research institute in more than 30 human cancer cell lines. And there was not a single one of them that did not respond to these micronutrients. In other words, we were able to block all known human cancer cell lines with micronutrients from spreading. I have to emphasize this as I'm doing this for the record, and that you are carrying this with you. You did not attend a lecture tonight where there was a guru on stage promising cancer cure for everyone. If cancer has progressed too far, especially if chemotherapy has been applied, which chemotherapy goes primarily to the bone marrow and destroys the blood cell forming cells there. In many cases, this means that the micronutrients cannot as well trigger what they ought to do, because they stimulate the body's own immune defense. And if this immune system has been damaged or has been destroyed, it is difficult or impossible to do this. So there's no guarantee here. But the things you're seeing is the first time that we can explain not only how the process of cancer spread is happening, but also how to stop it specifically. We can understand it, we can test it, we can apply it to the human system. When I studied medicine, we were told, well, cancer, that's like God walking across this planet, and wherever his curse falls, this is where cancer develops. It could be skin cancer, it could be any other part of your body. Well, I am saying nonsense. It is not the case that every part of our body develops cancer at the same rate. Why is it that most of the cancers develop in the reproductive system, like the uterus, ovaries, breast, prostata? Why not in the heart, or on the tongue, or on the earlobe? Why is it that leukocytes are particularly prone to become or subject to developing cancer into leukemia? Why not the red blood cells or the thrombocytes? Well, the red blood cells are a different thing, but thrombocytes. How come? If we understand why certain forms of cancer are more frequent than others, we've taken the first step to understanding how cancer develops in general and how we can stop it. Now here we go. Cancer cells spread in the human body by multiplying, but also by producing enzymes. Enzymes are biological scissors that have the unique ability to cut the surrounding collagen. Without that ability of digesting the surrounding collagen, this cancer cell cannot spread. So it is a precondition that this mechanism happens. Secondly, every cancer cell, no matter where its origin is in the body, uses this mechanism. Thirdly, the more of these collagen digesting enzymes, we call them collagenases, a cancer type produces, the faster the cancer spreads and the more deadly or malignant it is. Now let's look at metastasis. Here you have the liver, a liver tumor. If this tumor grows, ultimately the cells produce these collagen digesting enzymes, and the tumor, which is originally a lump, dissociates, because these cells, they dissociate from this basic structure because the connecting tissue is being destroyed. And they continue producing these Pac-Man, these choppers. So here comes a little capillary vessel in the liver, which is magnified here. So this would be the blood vessel going through the liver. And our cancer cells arrives at this blood vessel wall. What's happening? It continues to produce those collagen digesting enzymes, and with that mechanism paves its way from the outside of this blood vessel to the inside. How is that possible? Well, what are the walls of these blood vessels made of? Collagen. So, with the same enzymes that it has dissociated from the original tumor, this cancer cell paves its way from the outside of the blood vessel system to the inside. And then it is being washed away with the bloodstream until the bloodstream comes to very fine little capillaries again. And this is usually in the lung. Oxygenation of blood, so the bloodstream is spreading into many very thin little capillaries, which do not allow the passage of these cells. But our cancer cell still produces the choppers. So what happens now? Well, it eats its way from the inside of the blood vessel system to the outside. This end here being a blood vessel in the lung now. And it settles down in the lung. Now, how do we call this? Metastasis, exactly. So, what we learn from this picture is that all steps of cancer spread and metastasis depend on this mechanism of being able to destroy the collagen. Now, wouldn't you think it would be interesting to find a way how to plug the mouth of those Pac-Man? Well, that's exactly the idea we had way back. And this is the amino acid lysine, these green triangles here, and they fit precisely into those openings of those Pac-Man here, and they literally plug the mouth of those collagen digesting enzymes. Vitamin C, as we know from scurvy, produces collagen. So the combination of these two has a synergistic effect. One is strengthening, building up the collagen, vitamin C, and the other one is preventing the destruction of collagen, which is lysine. So here we have two key elements that help to promote a process we call encapsulation of cancer process. Now, if I've asked you the question in the beginning, why is it that the reproductive system is so frequently affected by cancer? The answer is very simple. But before I give it to you, I want to ask you a few questions. Imagine the female cycle, hormonal cycle, monthly cycle. In the middle of this cycle, around the 15th day, there is a peak of estrogen. What happens? What does that do? Well, it does something fascinating. It stimulates let me explain this briefly. This is the ovary here. This is the ovarian tube. This is the uterus. And here under this magnifying glass, we look at a mature cell, egg cell in the ovary. Now, once every month, in the middle of the cycle, one cell, the most mature egg cell, wanders from one organ, the ovary, into the other. The ovary duct here, without us regulating that knowingly. How can that be? How can one cell wander in our body without causing bleeding at that side, at least here, without us being worried about that? What do you think? Well, the answer is strikingly simple. They use collagen digesting enzymes. But only for a very limited time, only as long as this estrogen peaks. So it's a very timed process. Immediately when estrogen goes down, the stimulus is gone and the production of this collagen digesting enzyme ceases. And the wall of this ovary heals within minutes. And a month later, the same process takes place again. So, what happens if the timing gets lost? What happens if the switch can no longer be switched off? Then we have ovarian cancer. Because we do have cells here and in the other reproductive sites that have this innate ability to produce those collagen digesting enzymes. If they go awry, if they become cancerogenic, if their nucleus program, the software of this nucleus is out of control, it has the command of produce me collagen digesting enzymes unlimited, unrestricted. That's the precondition for cancer. And now we understand why ovarian cancer is particularly frequent. The same processes are being used if tissue, organs have to be restructured. For example, the uterus. Monthly bleeding. It's a tremendous architectural restructuring of tissue. Now that happens according to a precise plan. But this plan involves the destruction of tissue, and destruction of tissue is being done by what? Collagen digesting enzymes. Lactation. After a child is born, the breast of the mother is being restructured by a software program in the cells of the breast. Milk canals are being constructed. The old structure is being remodeled. How can that happen? If not through collagen digesting enzymes. Does it ring a bell? Those organs that already under physiological conditions have the ability to use those collagen digesting enzymes are the first organs where things can go wrong. And suddenly we understand why these organs are particularly prone to developing cancer. This is my handwriting, the first time that I wrote down, if this all is right, then one day cancer may no longer be a death verdict. Maybe it will not be a common disease anymore in future generations. Believe me, this was a moment that I will not forget. After all those years that I had been trained, cancer is a death verdict. You doubt yourself. You ask yourself, small, little you, why should it be you who finds this? Why not others? We are not only presenting this information here to a lay audience primarily, but also publish our results in leading scientific journals, peer-reviewed journals, international conferences, etc. If you want to review all the publications, we have them complete, not only just the titles or abstracts, we have them complete, documented on our websites. So there's no guessing what we are and what we are doing. You can print them out, you can take them to your doctor, you can take them as the foundation for discussions among friends, colleagues, whatever you want to do with it. Now, when it was clear that it was not just a concept, that was in about 2002. Remember, 1992 was the discovery, first publication. Then we didn't know how to finance the research, how to prove it. By 1999, we had the money together to build our own research institute, to finance our own research institute, I should say. And it took us about 2.5 years, to be sure that this is right. And when we knew it, when we knew that the micronutrients we were testing could actually block cancer cells from spreading, there was no holding back. I said to Dr. Nitzwicki, the research head of our institute and a longtime friend, I said, we gotta tell it to the world. So we took out a full-page advertisement in USA Today. I mentioned it before. On March 8, 2002. This is a copy of that. And we published the facts we found not in a medical journal first or a scientific journal first. That came later. We went directly to the people. We said, everyone needs to know this. Well, these guys, they didn't like us for that. They put us through their legal department and they said, another. But we could prove everything. So after 3 days of going back and forth, they printed it. And point number 5 is our research proves that vitamin C, lysine, proline, and specific extracts from green tea can inhibit the spread of cancer cells. So March 8, 2002 was an important day. That's when we told the world there is light at the end of the tunnel. Cancer may not be a death verdict any longer, an automatic death verdict any longer. Let's remember this date for a moment, March 8, 2002. December 15, 2007. The New York Times, on its title page, published an article, Reversing Trend, Big Drop is Seen in Breast Cancer. 15% drop in breast cancer in the US from August 2002 to December 2003, which was the latest data they could collect. Rates of the most common form of breast cancer dropped a startling 15% from August 2002 to December 2003, researchers reported yesterday, based on recent reports by the National Cancer Institute on the incidence of cancer. Now, they started to speculate, what could it be? One guy said, well, maybe the women in the United States took less estrogen during that time because there was a study out that discouraged the use of estrogen. I had another idea. I remembered the date of our publication, March 2002. So I went to the statistical board in the US and inquired about the sales of green tea in the US. And while green tea sales in the US were stagnant 2001 to 2002, in March here was the publication, it increased 34% from 2002 to 2003. Remember, this was about the period they were checking. And here were the latest data, December 2003, from the cancer statistics. I will be closely monitoring what these years will show with respect to the decline of breast cancer and other cancer forms in the US. I'm not saying at this point we are sure about this. I'm a scientist, but this is the only scientific explanation that I have for this dramatic decrease. 15%, we are talking about thousands, tens of thousands of women. September 2005, now you remember it was not just green tea, the combination we tested was lysine, vitamin C, polyphenols from green tea. The other component of this composition, vitamin C, was shown to selectively kill cancer cells, not by some remote scientists, but by the largest leading research institution in the world, which is the United States National Institutes of Health. That's a research city, 80,000 employees. They published this report not anywhere, but in the official proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the US. Title, I repeat this just so that you're not missing something. Vitamin C selectively kills cancer cells. Selectively means they left the healthy cells intact. Kills means destroys. Vitamin C means not toxic chemotherapy, but a penny substance. Someone comes to you and says there's no evidence about the role of vitamins in preventing or blocking cancer. You can relax and sit back. Let me show you something. If you don't have it available, you can download this information from our website or from the NIH. This picture summarizes where we stand. Remember the beginning of this talk? For thousands of years there was belief, and it was wrong. Discoveries, a new understanding turned this belief around. And this is exactly where we are today with respect to cancer. People have been dying from cancer like flies. There were certain steps, vitamins are discovered. The use of vitamin C in the fight against cancer was tried for the first time, so on and so forth. But it took two things: bringing this information together, financing independent research to prove it, and saying it loudly to build up the pressure that these leading research institutions had to publish this. Or do you think they did this voluntarily? They had to. They had to. But we say, we don't care. Great that you did it. The more the better. But we have to understand the time we are living in And that is, for the first time in medical history, we have the possibility to control cancer naturally. Not in all cases. If we meet in 10 years, in 20 years, there will still be cancer patients. But I dare to predict that in 20 years, cancer will no longer be the number 2 cause of death in London. And who made this possible? Who finances our research? The answer is very simple. The people we have helped. All of them, they're probably as skeptical as you are tonight. Good. That's what we want you to be. But if you decide to test it, if you're a patient, if you want to do it because you want to improve your health, general well-being, if you have a loved one who is being helped, then we expect you to do something. You don't have to come back to Dr. Rath and say thank you. But spread the information. Talk to others about it. That's the only way we can break the silence. Will it be easy? Of course not. Will you be fought for telling the truth? Of course. Will you be asked, if you are right, why don't we read it in the BMJ or see it on BBC? Of course. But if we were not right, none of that, what brought us together tonight, would have happened. We would have drowned. We would have drowned long ago in the courts of Germany or in other countries. The fact that I'm here after fighting the most profitable investment business on this planet, the pharmaceutical industry, after 15 years, tells you something about who's right or wrong. I'm the David, they are the gorilla or the Goliath, whatever you call them. Now we have to briefly answer the question, what does the pharmaceutical industry want? What are their goals when they initiate these giant campaigns? We've talked about some of these goals already. Maintain cancer as a death verdict. Protect the monopoly of patented chemotherapy. Protect their investments. Fight any health solutions that threaten this market with all means available. And above all, the last thing, cause public confusion. If you are confused, you are likely to stay with the status quo. Because why would you change if you're confused? That's what they factor in. So, for them, causing doubts, bad-mouthing Dr. Rath, saying he's a fraud, BMJ, calling him a charlatan, other medical journals. That's the stretch, is to teach a goal. There's another goal behind that. Remember, our profits don't go in my pocket. So when they attack me as a businessman, or as they did on German television, as the guy who sacrificed the life of Dominic for personal greed, they lie. So and they know they lie. So why do they still do this? Here's the answer. If we take the money to finance research, their attacks on my personal credibility ultimately result in less money for research. So they win time with their business with disease. And then you have this one here. When the BMJ knew that they could not stand a court trial against Dr. Rath, they were in the corner. And suddenly, like a phoenix out of the ashes, appears the Times referring to an article in the American Medical Association Journal, which is the counterpart to the BMJ, allegedly stating that vitamins kill. So, of course, we were observing with utmost interest what that study really said. This was a library study. It wasn't a real study. It was a study where some researchers went into the library and pulled out those studies they wanted to pull out. The others they left in there, meaning those that showed that vitamins work. If you have the chance and you have the patience to read this article, you should. They included, believe it or not, in their analysis, vitamin studies that lasted 1 day. And of course showed no results. The researchers, or whatever I should call them, that were the authors of this study came from Serbia, from the University of Nice. I'm sure you know Nice. I don't. The other one came from Palermo. Now, I checked them out on the internet, what their track record is, how many publications they had, whether these are reputable scientists. The only studies I could find were sponsored by pharmaceutical companies and chemotherapy drugs. I'll leave the conclusion up to you. But this is the battle we are in. It's a battle for the human minds. It's a battle for the minds of the people of London and the UK and for the people of the world. That's what we're in. And now that you know all these things, you must ask yourself, how long do I want to tolerate this business with chemotherapy? How long do I want to accept the fact that every day one child in Great Britain is dying under chemotherapy, and we're not sure whether it dies despite of chemotherapy or because of chemotherapy? I'll speed up a little bit, but the chapter on cardiovascular disease is something that is equally fascinating. Have you ever asked yourself why people get heart attacks and not nose attacks? Or kneecap attacks or elbow attacks? Or why the heart? If cholesterol is the culprit and damages the blood vessel wall, it is like a pipeline where the water quality is bad, which leads to the damage along the entire pipeline. Have you ever asked yourself, why do we get atherosclerosis and not venosclerosis? Our blood vessel pipeline in the body is about 60,000 miles long. Half of it are veins. Why do we get atherosclerosis only? Why do get animals no heart attacks, but people do? And here you have, let me guess, 4,000 cardiologists in London alone who make a living from being on TV and being in the operation room and telling everyone I'm the sharpest guy on town. None of them can answer those questions. What does this, remember the questions with cancer? If you're not able to answer the most basic questions in cancer, you are not able to solve the riddle. Same thing for heart disease. What do I mean with this? Well, with heart disease, the dilemma is even bigger. We have annual losses from people dying from heart attacks and strokes amounting to the population of cities like Liverpool. Here's the first patient where we documented that this disease too can largely be gone one day. 51-year-old businessman. This is a ultra-fast CT, which is does the X-rays fast enough to avoid the blurring effect that you normally would have when the heart beats. So you know, under a normal X-ray, you can't measure the calcification in the coronary arteries because of the pumping heart. But this machine is so quick that you can measure those calcifications in the coronary arteries. So what you see here is, this would be the heart, a very big one, so this is a magnified picture. It's a slice of the heart. You look inside the heart from the bottom, so this is the left side of the heart, and this white spot here, well, this is the left coronary artery, cross-section, and then this white spot here is the calcification. 1 year later, same patient, same heart, same left coronary artery, and the deposits are gone. What happened? Was there some angioplasty or some bypass surgery? Of course not. What this person did, he filled up the cells that make up his blood vessel wall with the micronutrients that were deficient in these cells. Of course, he didn't put it in these cells like that. He was taking the micronutrients and they found their way automatically there. So what happened is that the supply of optimum micronutrients replenished the cells that made up the blood vessel walls. The cracks and crevices closed. The debris was naturally pushed out. And this is what you see here. We stimulated the cells to think anew. What is your job? What do you have to do? Produce enough collagen. So here's the answer to the riddle of why people do get heart attacks and not nose attacks. What sets the organ heart apart from all other organs in the body? It pumps. it moves. The liver doesn't mum. The brain doesn't move. So it pumps. On top of the heart are the coronary arteries. They're riding on top. So with every heartbeat, the following happens. I've magnified this in this picture here. This is the coronary artery cross-section here. During the filling phase of the heart muscle is relaxed. And the coronary artery riding on top is open. During the pumping phase of the heart, when the blood is thrown out into the aorta, the muscle, the heart muscle is tense. And the coronary artery on top is squeezed flat. And that happens 100,000 times a day normally. That's the pulse, number of pulse beats or number of heartbeats per day in your body. Well, let's compare this to a garden hose in your garden. If the garden hose is new, elastic, you can step on this garden hose 100,000 times a day. Nothing will happen. If it's brittle, if it has been in the sun too long, lost its elasticity, that's the spot where you will see the cracks and crevices develop, where you step on. That's the explanation why we get heart attacks and not nose attacks. Because the heart moves. Because the moving heart is exposing the underlying instability of the blood vessel walls as the primary location. What that also tells you is that if your doctor wants to prescribe you cholesterol-lowering drugs, you may smile and say, "Thank you. I would like first to stabilize my blood vessel wall by taking an optimum amount of vitamin C from the health food store." He may not like this answer, but then you can tell him this picture and ask him, "What is your explanation?" He won't have an answer. Or this one. 99.9% of the animals on our planet produce their own vitamin C. By doing that, they have sufficient amount to stabilize, produce enough collagen, stabilize the blood vessel walls. They don't develop heart attacks. Our ancestors have lost the ability for what we call endogenous production of vitamin C, which means production of vitamin C in our liver. And we are dependent on every milligram of vitamin C that we get in our nutrition. The most interesting animals among them are the hibernating animals, like the bear. Before they hibernate, they eat a lot. So bears have cholesterol levels of up to 600 milligrams per deciliter and more. Now, if the cholesterol-lowering drug manufacturers would be right, these guys would long be extinct from an epidemic of heart attacks because they get too little cholesterol-lowering drugs. But the answer is much simpler. If you protect your blood vessel walls, if they are elastic and stable, you can tolerate elevated cholesterol levels and triglyceride levels. I'm not saying you should ignore them. Healthy lifestyle, exercise, prudent nutrition. What I'm saying is be careful with cholesterol-lowering drugs. They have severe long-term side effects. Heart failure. These are the patients that have difficulties to breathe. When they walk staircases, they have to stand after the first floor, on the first floor and the second floor, etc. Edema in the legs. The heart of a heart failure patient pumps like that, when it normally pumps like that. Instead of about 1 teacup of blood thrown out by a normal heart pumping mechanism, maybe half of a teacup of blood is being thrown out into the aorta in a heart failure patient's heart. What's the reason for that? What do you think? Well, it's really not so difficult. The function of the heart in the body is like the motor in your car. It's the engine. It constantly moves and has the highest workload of all organs. So where do you fill your gasoline in your car? Do you need gasoline for your windscreen wiper or for your glove department? Of course not. You make sure that your engine has enough energy. It's really not so difficult. Sometimes I say, when you attend a lecture of this nature, you go through 2 semesters of medicine without paying for it. It's so logical. So bringing bioenergy to the heart muscle cells will help them to do their job. The engine will drive on 4 cylinders instead of 2 or 3 cylinders. I mentioned this Nobel laureate, Eichmann, at the beginning of my talk, 1931. In 1929, he got the Nobel Prize. In 1931, he published this picture of a patient with beriberi. Now, one of the symptoms of severe beriberi is heart failure, which is shown here. This is an X-ray, and as you probably understand this very quickly, if the heart doesn't throw out the blood, it becomes larger and larger because too much heart is being congested back into the inside of the heart, into the chambers. So the enlargement of the heart is a clear sign of heart failure. Now he injected intramuscular vitamin B1 to these patients, and here you can see within a few weeks the heart was pumping normal and had a normal size again. Vitamin B1. We did oral studies with oral micronutrients in heart failure patients in 2005, and 9 out of 10 patients could resume a normal life again. Well, what is the answer of conventional cardiology to heart failure? Any idea? Bypass? No. Dialysis? No. This guy. Remember? Cape Town, Christian Barnard. He was probably after Armstrong, who landed on the moon, the most famous guy in the past century. For doing what? Transplanting a heart from a patient with heart failure, or to a patient with heart failure, who survived for a few weeks. Instead of doing the obvious, filling up the cells of the heart muscle that had run dry with micronutrients. I've summarized this absurdity in this little drawing. It's like you running up with the last drop of gasoline in your tank to a gas station and say, "Hey guy, fill me up my tank." and he says, filling up your tank? We're going to exchange the engine. That's exactly what the answer of today's cardiologist is to a patient with severe heart failure. Absurd. This is a book I wrote on all those things, on heart disease, heart attack, stroke, irregular heartbeat, high blood pressure, heart failure, diabetes, cholesterol, and much more. You can go online and read it online, download the chapters you want, etc. Cellular medicine and AIDS, that's the last disease I'm going to be touching on. It is a huge public issue. It's a huge public health issue. And it is a tragedy what is going on. As you know, probably, we do have a branch of our foundation in South Africa. South Africa is one of the countries most haunted by this epidemic. So I spent personally down there about a year and a half and consider myself rather knowledgeable on what's going on. But here you see the very same mechanism like we've got to know it with cancer. The antiretroviral drugs, which is the chemotherapy for AIDS, is nothing else than chemotherapy for cancer in pill form. Most of these drugs are simply the same ingredients packed to be swallowed like chewing gum. Remember, from chemotherapy in cancer, it destroys the immune system, you get infections, and so on and so forth. It destroys the immune system. Excuse me? You're having a disease that is called acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which is characterized by a failing immune system. The patient comes to the pharmaceutically educated doctor, diagnoses HIV, and the answer he gives is a drug that first and foremost attacks the bone marrow in the immune system. What do you make of that? I've summarized it in this picture. Here's the bone marrow. That's the sternum here. The production site for, the major production site for our immune system cells, white blood cells. They are divided into different types, which are called neutrals, monos, lymphocytes. Now, from those 9 Nobel Prizes, about half of them were given for uncovering or for discovering the role of vitamins in stabilizing, enhancing, optimizing the immune system. So the role of vitamins for the improvement of immune system is no question. It can only be doubted by someone who moved himself out of science altogether. But instead of promoting vitamins to fight immune deficiencies, our friends from the pharmaceutical industry, they are promoting chemotherapy that attacks the immune system in addition to this being already weak. And they're selling this as cure or treatment or whatever. If you think chemotherapy is already a scandal, you need to think new about the dimension of unscrupulous businesses when you talk about the pharmaceutical business with AIDS drugs. Here are the statistics. The global report of the WHO on HIV/AIDS, published in 2001, after a quarter of a century of the AIDS epidemic, shows that if you are HIV infected and you do not take ARVs, your chance of being alive after 13 years is 80%. The available studies that have been conducted with ARVs calculated on 13 years show that if you take ARVs, your chance of surviving those 13 years is essentially zero. This scam only works by our friends, the gorillas, making an equation between HIV and AIDS. And then telling everyone HIV is a highly aggressive virus that kills people. Well, the statistics of the WHO tell us otherwise. If you are alive after 13 years, this virus is neither highly aggressive nor deadly. Now, there are people around that say there is no HIV virus. We know there is one. We are studying this in our research institute. We know exactly there is one. But what we know also is that this virus is not the deadly virus that causes AIDS, the deadly AIDS condition. Unless there is a cofactor. There are co-variables in the game, meaning maybe a cytomegalovirus virus or another virus. We don't know that. No one knows this. But the statistics are very clear. Putting that aside for a moment, what the pharmaceutical industry says, we are not interested in what really causes AIDS. We just want this equation. Because then, if we have in the perception of the people, of the doctors and the common man, this equation, we have the same threat potential we have with cancer, like with cancer. You are HIV infected, you're going to die. If you're going to die, you will follow what I give you. You will take my ARVs. And from then on, this human body is my marketplace. If you take ARVs, you have the same line of symptoms. You develop all kinds of infections that you've never seen in your body. HIV-positive people on ARV drugs have a 4 to 6 times higher chance of dying from AIDS than if you do not take those drugs. But then, what about Bono? What about Brad Pitt? What about all those singers and musicians and the politicians who are Tony? His Marshall Plan for Africa. They're taking your taxpayer money and telling you, I'm Tony. I need your money to help the poor in Africa. What he's really doing is, he's putting the money down the throat of GlaxoSmithKline, who are the largest exporters of these ARVs to Africa, for drugs that do not help, but cause death in genocidal proportions, financed with your taxpayer money. I'm not singling out Tony. Angela across the channel does the same. Boehringer Ingelheim produces nevirapine. Same thing. The politicians of the largest exporting nations of pharmaceutical drugs, they are running around like Mother Teresa, pretending to help the poor, while in reality promoting toxic, deadly ARV business and financing the pharmaceutical business with disease with your taxpayer money. That's the name of the game. This is what we did. We are donating our vitamins to the poor communities around Cape Town and in other areas too. These are the first 15 patients we have helped, and it was their idea to hold this press conference because they wanted to speak to the world and say, see, we are leading a normal life again. We studied the effect of the micronutrients in form of a questionnaire that was filled out by the patients and the nurses that evaluated the different symptoms of these patients. If they were very sick, they were seen by a community doctor. So this was the way we could help them. The whole program was conducted by a community organization, like corresponding to the GLC, for example, in a township, on a much smaller scale, of course. We would donate the vitamins to them. They would give it out to the needy. They would be responsible for the assessment of the improvements. But what we found was most significant. AIDS, according to the WHO, is not defined as HIV infection. AIDS is defined as the occurrence of key symptoms. And one of them is the continuous reoccurrence of fever and chills. So we were interested to assess the reoccurrence of fever and chills with micronutrients. And as you can see, there was after 4 weeks a 52% decrease, and after 8 weeks it stayed constant, a 52% decrease, an effect that was never seen with an ARV drug. The second symptom, according to the WHO, that defines AIDS is constant diarrhea. Now, diarrhea decreased by 50% and 51% after 4 and 8 weeks, respectively. The third symptom is persistent cough. If you have real AIDS, not HIV infection, if you have real AIDS, you cough consistently because your lung infections. Now, there was a 33% decrease and a 39% decrease after 4 and 8 weeks, respectively, in that symptom. The last AIDS-defining symptoms is TB, tuberculosis-related symptoms. They decreased 40% and 61% with micronutrients only. None of these patients was on ARV drugs during that time. Now, while all this may be statistics, this is something you can see. AIDS is causing ulcers everywhere in the body. Most prominently, of course, are those seen outside on the skin. And then these wounds are being infected, super infected with bacteria in this case. Now, this is the same collar region of the same patient after 4 weeks of micronutrients. And this is the young lady that is still doing wonderful. She calls me, "You're my dad." As I said, I can only touch a few things today, but it gives you an impression on what's going on in the field of science. We need to briefly touch on the field of politics. No one in South Africa can afford ARV drugs. So the only way for Glaxo to sell its drugs, or for that matter for other pharmaceutical companies in this business, is to organize pressure groups in South Africa that go through the streets in SR formations and demand the government free ARVs for all. You will not believe it, but that's happening as we sit here. One of these groups is called Treatment Action Campaign. Like the brown shirts in 1933, they have a uniform. And in this case, this is a white t-shirt that says HIV positive. Hardly any one of this is HIV positive. The way they organize their demonstrations is they take a bus, sponsored from abroad, of course. They drive through the poorest of the poor townships. They pick up the young kids that are unemployed, have nothing to eat. They give them a sandwich, a Coke, and a t-shirt saying HIV positive. And for that, they put them in the bus, they bring them to Cape Town or another major city, put them a placard in their hand, and then run against your own government. Not to forget, at the next corner is the television crew from the BBC and from CNN, reporting that the people of South Africa are rallying against their own government to demand, finally, ARV drugs. Talking about creative marketing, there you have it. These guys are so bold because of all the support they get. Not from the people, but financial support from abroad. That these drug pushers, Treatment Action Campaign, together with the South African Medical Association, remember British Medical Association? There's a South African Medical Association. These two guys, or two organizations, are suing us, meaning me personally, our foundation, together with the South African government, now listen well, for conducting illegal, criminal experiments in the townships of South Africa by giving these poor people micronutrients. They have compared me with a doctor in the Nazi concentration camps, conducting illegal medical experiments on prisoners. Well, I'm saying you do this one time with me. If you go to our website, you'll find as the first segment now the comprehensive response that I wrote to this provocation. In this response, I'm documenting that the experiments in the Nazi concentration camps, by the way, there were of course no vitamin experiments, were done with pharmaceutical drugs. Hardly any of these drugs had a name. They all had code names because they were freshly patented. I've included documents from the Nuremberg War Tribunal that shows correspondence from BASF to Hoechst to Bayer, Beringwerke, directly to the doctors in the concentration camps who did those experiments. I've included the publications in medical journals about these criminal experiments. The records show that this was not the SS. The SS didn't even have the power, the mental or scientific power to train these doctors. These were doctors on the payroll of Bayer who did these experiments. And Bayer paid a gazillion in the last 70 years to hide all those facts and blame it on some crazy SS people. I've documented that the apartheid regime in South Africa would not have been possible without those people who escaped the Nuremberg War Tribunal fleeing through the international network of IG Farben, which was the cartel name for Bayer, BASF and Hoechst at the time, to South America and to South Africa. And how the concentration camps of Auschwitz turned into Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was being imprisoned for 27 years. How the ghettos of Warsaw turned into the ghettos of Johannesburg and Cape Town. How the Nuremberg racial laws preventing contacts between Aryans and Jews were one-to-one translated into South African apartheid laws preventing contacts between whites and blacks. The Nazis that escaped were the architects of the apartheid regime. And the economic pillar of this regime were the pharmaceutical, chemical cartels. I have to stop here because our time is running. I encourage you to read this complaint online with all the references that I just mentioned. Why you did not know about it? If you go out here, I want you to take a few sentences, a few analyses with you. First, the pharmaceutical industry is not a health industry, but an investment business accountable above all to its shareholders. The marketplace of the pharmaceutical industry is your body, but it's only as long as it's sick. The extension of diseases is the precondition for the continued growth of the pharmaceutical investment business. The prevention and elimination of diseases threatens the pharmaceutical investment business and is therefore being fiercely fought by this lobby. See BMJ. The proven health benefits of vitamins are the biggest threat to the survival of the pharmaceutical investment business because they help correct the cellular basis of today's most common diseases and thereby threaten to eliminate the most profitable drug markets. So if I would be working in the field of osteoporosis or some other remote disease, it may cause some resistance, but not that fierce resistance that we're facing when we attack cancer and heart disease. We need to understand that the economic interests of the pharmaceutical investment business and the health interests of billions of people are simply incompatible. You recall Baycol, Lipobay, Vioxx. 50 people died, 6 million became living time bombs. Vioxx, the record says, the US health authorities, that 30,000 people who had taken Vioxx will die from it during the coming years. You know, the main problem is this one. Lipobay and Vioxx are not the exception. They are the rule. And here's the other thing you need to understand about pharmaceutical marketing. You have a drug, aspirin. It's prescribed. 1 aspirin a day keeps heart disease away. Maybe. But after 6, 8, 10 years, aspirin is digesting collagen. You will see the effects. Heart disease increases, cancer increases, or other diseases that are related to collagen digestion or degenerative diseases will increase. Cholesterol-lowering drugs are given for heart disease. No one tells you that after 4 to 7 years, your chances of getting liver cancer and other forms of cancer is multiplying. Painkillers, Vioxx, you take it for arthritis, but you develop heart disease. Estrogen, you take it to allegedly go against osteoporosis, but 1/3 of the women who take estrogen continuously, estrogen replacement therapy, develop breast cancer. 1/3. So you see, it's a system that's behind that, creating new disease markets in your body. The deadly side effects of registered drugs are the fourth leading cause of death in the industrialized countries, including Great Britain, surpassed only by heart disease, cancer, and strokes. So the very industry that says we want the monopoly as your purveyors of health has created an epidemic among the people of Great Britain and other countries that is only surpassed by the three leading causes of death. Amazing. The dimension of this fraud: the annual profits of the pharmaceutical business with disease are 500 billion euro. That's about, 380 billion British pound. If you put that in euros as a stack, one of each other, you can travel around the equator 30 times. Just 1 year. Just the profits. From an industry that promises you health, but delivers what? The opposite. That influences every part of society. Medicine, media, politics, we've touched upon them tonight. The way this works, or can work, is only if you understand marketing. That means roughly 34% of the operating expenses of the pharmaceutical industry are not used for research, but for marketing. Research is about half of that. You need to tell the people, we are there to fight heart disease if you want to promote heart disease. You need to tell them we are there to fight cancer. There will be a day when you wake up and there will be no more cancer if you want to make money from continuing cancer. If you don't do that, it doesn't work. So those 4-color advertisements are part of the strategy. Science for a better life, Bayer. This guy says, I had a stroke. Research is the best medicine. Well, the question is, why did he get a stroke in the first place? I've described it before, this business with disease, this control, this monopoly that the pharmaceutical industry, this web they have built over our society as a dictatorship. You can really compare the key mechanisms to political dictatorships. They use the same mechanisms. Citizens are held imprisoned. If you want to break out, for example, Dominic, you're being shot at. Citizens are held hostage by the pharmaceutical industry. They cannot break out because there are protectionist drug legislation that says we have the monopoly on health, not vitamins, patented prescription drugs. Paul talked about some of these fences that fence off any possibility for you to break out of this. One of them is this Codex Alimentarius effort at the worldwide level, and the other one is at the EU level in Brussels. We briefly have to introduce the stakeholders, the political stakeholders, and the interest groups behind. Here is David Rockefeller. He has controlling equity in about 200 pharmaceutical companies. He can truly be called the godfather of this investment business. The British counterpart is the Rothschild Group here. And they select their political stakeholders in the key export nations of this business. And in the 80s, it was Reagan, Thatcher, and Kohl, and then there was some period between. There was Clinton, and here we had Schroeder. And now, they're back to have the old guard together. Bush promoting his $15 billion AIDS plan for Africa. Tony Blair, his Marshall Plan for Africa, but only money for countries that import our ARV drugs. We're at the end of the talk. Our Health Alliance has three main elements: research, the development of natural health approaches, education, like tonight, and the fight for natural health freedom. But among all of those things, education is the key. We help the people that come to us, not only with micronutrients. We help them by educating, so they themselves can become educators. We are not an organization that is promoting doctors. We believe that the change that lies ahead of us comes from the people themselves. We do not exclude doctors, we welcome them, but our main focus are people like you. People who have a genuine interest, who are not brainwashed, who will speak out when they are convinced. This is something else you can do. We have, when you go out, we do have a little information booklet where many of those pictures that you saw tonight are contained, so you can take them home with you. And at the end of that, you will see this signature drive, Equality for Natural Therapies. We believe that the BMJ case is not over. We believe it has just started at a different level, not in the courtroom. But the pressure on the BMJ to acknowledge what you've heard tonight, to make it available not only to the people but also to the doctors of the UK, is a must. And this is what the purpose of this campaign is. We invite you today not only to improve your own health, but if you want to join us, you can do that. You can be part of our Health Alliance. You can be helping others, help yourself, and above all, you can look in the mirror or in the face of your children and grandchildren one day, who may ask you, what did you do when you heard about this? Or when you knew it? And you can say, I did it. I did something. You don't have to work with us. You can do this for yourself in your community. But I encourage you to become a health educator after tonight, in one way or another. We are determined as an organization, as the Dr. Rath Health Alliance, to break down the walls that you've seen before, the walls of diseases that prevent us from entering a world where heart disease, cancer will still be around, but they will not be the cause of death for every second in case of heart disease or every fourth in case of cancer person. We are looking for people to work with us who share our vision for social responsibility in your community. People who care about this community, about our planet. And people who want to take responsibility for themselves and for the people around them. I'm at the end of my talk. I encourage you to stay around, take the information that you'd like to take with you. And if you want to have additional information, you can go to our website and study that. Thank you very much for coming.